Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jayme Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
And I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And for this episode, we are very excited to welcome a special guest. We are so delighted that Father Cathie Caimano has joined us. Cathie is an Episcopal priest for more than 25 years, and she has the most amazing title, self-described as the free-range priest. We want to hear more about that for the last decade. Cathie has been exploring what Christian ministry might look like beyond traditional institutional boundaries. And in our movement of inclusive Catholicism, we are very interested in this topic because our faces take many forms in our communities. Through her writing, her coaching, her retreats, digital initiatives, she's helping church leaders imagine what it's like to become cage-free in this evolving spiritual landscape we're in. She served as a consultant to more than 60 congregations and the clergy that serve them. Her website might be worth a visit, freerangepriest.org, and we'll put that in our close as well for you. She's in North Carolina, and she has the great joy and honor of having a Great Dane at her knee, as well as her awesome husband. And we're so delighted. Welcome, Father Cathie. And before we jump in, we always like to give our guests a moment to add anything you'd like folks to know about you before we start.
Oh my gosh, I think you covered it really well. Also, I will say I am a runner. I've been a runner for over 40 years. And so I think that not only does that help sort of define me as a person, but it also actually has a lot to do with my ministry because I feel like running itself has both brought me close to God, but it's also helped me understand the sense of community and the sense of belonging that I think that I would love to help churches continue to reimagine in the digital age.
I love that. And, and this whole question of how do we create community in new forms and how do we interrelate with people outside of our communities as well in a sort of congregationally focused culture like we're in are questions I'd love to explore with you. But I'd love to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your call to ministry.
Oh my gosh.
When did you first realize God is doing something with you? And tell us a little bit about your story and your trajectory.
Well, thank you. Thanks for asking that question. Honestly, it was a very, very young age. I tell this story a lot. When I was a very young child, like 5 or 6 years old, I used to go outside and talk with God, and God would talk with me in full sentences, and we just knew each other really well. And I never told anyone about that. It never seemed unusual to me. I did not know that God wasn't talking with everybody all the time. So I never really shared that, but I've always just felt this close relationship with God. God has always just been there in my life. Then I went to Georgetown University, which is a Roman Catholic Jesuit university. I was raised Roman Catholic. My family is Roman Catholic. And I went there to study languages. I really didn't think about the fact that it was a Roman Catholic, not really that much, but I got really involved. Like I worked at the campus ministry office. I was in the retreat program. I sang in the choir. And then as I was leaving seminary, like the spring break of my senior year, I always joke about that. All my friends, spring break of your senior year of college, they're all going to the beach. They're all going on a 5-day silent retreat. So I did the Ignatian exercises for 5 days at a convent in Western Pennsylvania. And I had a full-on calling experience where I heard Jesus say, "Do this in remembrance of me," after Mass when I was alone in the chapel. And I knew I was called to the priesthood. It was it just like all happened. But I was a 22-year-old Roman Catholic girl. And so I was just like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. Then I moved on and I was going to become a psychologist and I ended up moving to Durham, North Carolina, blah, blah, blah. And then I accidentally discovered the Episcopal Church and fell in love with it. And then all these doors opened and then off I went and I became a priest and here I am.
And here you are. And so you don't know this about me, but I am a fellow Hoya.
Oh,
And I
yes,
just
that's a
I
good.
wonder if the university could do a head count on the
Yeah.
number of women after their Jesuit education who
Wow,
went
that's
on
awesome.
to pursue ministry. I have a classmate who also did, and we had a guest not long ago who is a rabbi who came into his understanding of his vocation at Georgetown as well. So,
Oh, what year did you graduate?
Hoya
Go,
Chacha.
Hoyas.
I'm not putting
Hoya
that
6.
on a podcast because I'm
Oh!
trying to maintain the illusion of youth.
Well, I just went to
When
my 35th college reunion. I'm just going to put it that way.
I was on the campus too, and I was also at a 5, but it wasn't 25. So
I was
anyway,
35, 35.
okay, and I was at my
Yeah.
40th, Kathy, so I was a little ahead of you. But
Wow, there you go.
we're gonna have a
We
coffee
can talk
date
about
and
that
talk
later.
about that
Yeah,
another
we
time.
are going to talk about that. Yeah.
So that's just fantastic. And you went off and you discovered there was this world that had a lot of the valences that are there in our beautiful
Yeah.
Catholic tradition, but a little bit more inclusivity, which is something that, as you know, is what our movement is all about. Jayme, you were about to ask something as I turned my
Father,
ringer off.
Father Cathie, what a delight to have you with us here on Cutting Edge Catholics podcast. Appreciate very much your time. And I have to ask, now that you've been ordained for over 25 years, I'll actually ask 2 questions. First of all, the question about your priesthood. I'm wondering, now that you're looking back at 25 years of ordained ministry, what has changed most in your understanding of the priesthood? But also, I have to ask, since we're referring to you as Father Cathie, that when we hear the title Father, so many of us think of men in the Roman Catholic tradition. Here at Holy
Yeah.
Family Catholic Church, we have Mother Annie, who is our associate pastor, and we just love the gifts that she brings as a woman priest to ministry. But it's not often, at least here in Austin, Texas, that we hear of a woman with the title Father. So I'd love to just put those 2 on the table. One, in 25 years of ministry, how has your understanding of the priesthood changed? And also tell us about this fascinating title.
Okay. First of all, it's 26 years of ministry, and the only reason that I make that plain is because I always joke that I'm not very good at math. I was ordained in January of 2000. So it's awesome. I never have to think about how many years I've been ordained, because whatever year it is, that's how many years I've been ordained. So, all right, I'm going to take the second one first. As you know, I was raised Roman Catholic, and in my tradition, in the Episcopal tradition, I would say most women do go by mother, who go by titles. A lot of times they don't go by titles. And and I'll also tell you a story that when we were getting ready to graduate from seminary, everybody was sitting around, and it became a topic of conversation among the women, like, what are you going to be called? Like, for the men, especially then in the late 1990s, there was no conversation whatsoever. All of them are going to be Father so and so. I'm from the South, or I'm not from the South, but I was ordained out of the South. Some of the men go by Mr. If you're in a really low church, you might go by Mr. Steve or whatever, but most of them are going to go by Father, and it wasn't even an issue. And we were all sitting around talking about what we were going to go by, and I was like, why should I have to think about that, right? Father is the title of a priest, right? When you say father, then you know that person is a priest, right? When you say mother, people think you're a nun. They just do. I love nuns, but I'm not a nun, right? I am a priest. And I like to say that we call God Father, but we don't necessarily mean God is a man, right? But we do mean that God has fatherly qualities, right? Leading and guiding and guarding. And I think that women can have fatherly qualities, just like I think men can have motherly qualities, that sort of thing. So, and the biggest reason is because people ask me, right? Like, they love that. They remember me. I have a funny story that I'm not going to tell right now. They're both online dating, or somebody remembered me because my name was Father Cathie. But that people, it brings up the conversation, and it helps people understand, what it is that you do and why priests go by Father, and what it means to be a priest, etc. And the last thing I'm going to say about that is, I was in New York when I got ordained in this first New York City, and the first church I served was in New York City. And New York City, like, if you've never lived there, it's so huge, but it's just a bunch of tiny little small towns, right? If you live in a neighborhood, everybody knows everybody in the small neighborhood. Everybody used to call me, like all the bus drivers, all the bagel guys, all the, like, I would walk by the doormen. They'd be like, "Morning, Father. How are you, Father?" And so they just loved it. And so I love that it has a sort of paradox and humor to it, as well as the very serious aspect of the tradition, which again, it's not the Church of Cathie. I don't do this from my own authority. I do it in the authority of the church, which is why titles are important to me and why the title Father is important to me. And 26 years later, it is what it is, right?
Well,
I did write an article. Go ahead.
Finish your thoughts. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting, Cathie, because when I was first getting ordained, that was a big question for me. As people kept saying, "Well, what are we going to call you? And what are we going to call you?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my mentor had always gone by Tim, so I was like, "Well, I was thinking maybe you just call me Trish," but I had a colleague who was Father Terry, and I found that so jarring. And the thing I want to say about that I think is so important is that it also is just it's disruptive, and that's not a bad thing. In a
Hmm.
tradition where we have so gendered leadership because of the
Hmm.
canons and the way it's exclusive, all pathways to serious leadership in the Roman system are involved, or someone having the credentials of ordination. And and my friend had actually decided to be Father Terry because her kids said to her, "You're our mother. We don't want other people calling you mother." And so now calling her Father Terry is as natural. I mean, I can't imagine calling her anything but Father Terry, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you're
Exactly.
giving me pause again. I tend to go by I'm in the land of the Lutherans, so people tend to call me Pastor Trish a lot, but
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
that title is evocative, and good on you that you
Thank
stepped out
you.
26 years ago. So then Jayme was asking you about, what have you noticed in these years that you've been
Oh my
laboring
gosh.
in the vineyard, as it were?
That is such a huge question. I'm going to say for me, the most obvious answer, and the one that has basically framed my ministry so much, especially in the last 10 years, is that when I was formed in seminary and when I was first ordained and when I went out into the world, into the church as a priest, the only thing I ever imagined for my vocation was that I was going to be a full-time salaried priest in a congregation, right? So I might serve in a small one or a large one, or I might serve on a staff, or I might be a solo pastor. But that was going to be my life, right? The traditional idea of what we understand as like a building and a paid clergy person and a congregation that does everything and upholds everything financially and every other way, and a set of programs, and go, right? And it was not that long into my career that I saw the cracks in that system. The idea that it's not supporting itself anymore, right? We can't literally afford it. We don't have enough people in church. People want different things out of church than the kind of programmatic, what I call the mid 20th century model that we were all kind of formed in. And even this idea of what church is and why we gather. Not to mention the super heavy organizational, hierarchical, administrative stuff that just kind of feels heavy. And I'd like to say is sort of crushing us and our spirit for ministry. That just became more and more obvious as I went on. And so I think that's the biggest shift and the biggest sort of surprise and growing edge. Like if you had asked me in 1999 when I graduated from seminary, in 2000 when I got ordained, kind of how I imagined my career, would unfold. And, some people feel called to be a bishop, or that, there's a certain trajectory. And I like to say that, like, without even trying to, I did actually follow the trajectory, right? So I was a baby priest in a big church in New York City. Then I was an associate in North Carolina at a medium-sized church. Then I went to Kansas and I was the solo pastor of a smallish church. I would say medium-sized church. Then I came back and I worked for the bishop on the bishop staff in North Carolina. And so I was like doing the thing, right? And not that I meant to, but it's sort of like that's what you did, right? You sort of have to kind of keep going. And then I stepped off, right? Then I very consciously left that path because I felt like I needed, and I think the whole church needs, a different path. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I feel like that is the kind of the biggest thing that I have learned in ministry, the biggest surprise. Yeah.
Father Cathie, we also have to ask up front about the way in which you self-identify. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that within inclusive or independent Catholicism, the sandbox in which many of us play contains many other inclusive or independent Catholics, but it's rare that we get to be able to speak to independent Episcopal or independent Orthodox clergy. So it's really exciting to be able to have you on, Father Cathie. Within independent Catholicism, we have a term, the Episcopi Vagantes, wandering or stray bishops. It was sort of a derogatory term that that Roman Catholic hierarchs gave to those within our movement to essentially say they are not part of us, right? To be able to distinguish between them and us and to be able to set up this wall of separation. But you have come up with a different way of branding yourself, of being able to self-identify. I think that really that causes some of us a bit of envy. It's like, that is really cool what Father Cathie is doing in self-identifying as a free range priest. So wondering if you might be able to just pull back the curtain a bit and tell us about where that phrase came from, why it resonated with you, and maybe the effect that it's had in other people with whom, that you've encountered.
Thank you. That's such a great question. I really appreciate that. First of all, I do want to make clear, I am an Episcopal priest. I am totally loyal to the doctrine, discipline, and worship of the Episcopal Church, and I serve as a free range priest at the discretion of my bishop and with the permission of my bishop. So I am very much identified as an Episcopalian and want to keep it that way. And I'm grateful to my bishop who has allowed me to sort of chart another path, right? And I will say that there's a little bit of forgiveness versus permission as I went to do that. And I keep sort of pushing that boundary just a little bit. And so far, I haven't gotten in trouble, but my bishop is listening. I just want to make sure that that is completely clear. And I also like to say, so the term free range priest actually, when I worked for Bishop Michael Curry, who some people may know because he was the preacher at the royal wedding of Harry and Meghan back in 2018. He was the Bishop of North Carolina at the time. And then he went on to become the head of the entire Episcopal Church after he got elected. And when he got elected, I was on his staff. And then that's when I just left and started my own ministry / business as free range priest. And it was he who actually coined the term free range priest about me. Like, you're my free range priest, right? Because we were constantly in conversations about that, about how to do ministry differently. How can we, work, like I like to say, inside, outside, and alongside the institution to share the faith, more sustainably and more joyfully, I would say. So he was the first person to call me that. And then my husband started calling me that. And then I just started to call myself that. And I actually trademarked it. I'm pointing at it. It's on my desk. I have an actual US trademark for the term free range priest. There it is. Woohoo! So I could send you a cease and desist letter if you call yourself a free range priest, but I won't. But I do own the term. So that's how serious I am about it. And I will say that I love it for so many reasons. But the biggest one is it's both of the things, right? It is free range and it is priest. And so I have gotten some pushback, and I have gotten, actually, surprisingly, from some surprising corners, some actual anger. Like, you're saying that you can do whatever you want. In other words, like, there's no accountability. And I say to that, no, right? Free range. So I'm out there, I'm trying new things, I'm doing new things, but all of it is within the priesthood, right? So I am completely devoted to the tradition and the history and the liturgy and the scripture of the faith. And I am absolutely living in that and upholding it to the best of my ability. So I am actually grounded into the tradition, and there's nothing theological or even liturgical that I'm doing that is different than what the church has always done. In fact, one of my big things is kind of trying to bridge the first and the 21st centuries and kind of just jump over the 20th century, because it seems like we are stuck organizationally in the 20th century. So rather than try to get unstuck, I'm sort of saying, like, what can we learn structurally from the first century church? So I like the balance of the free range and the priest. And of course, everyone says, like the chicken, which is why I came up with cage-free ministry, because I'm like, it's still ministry. It just tastes better, right?
I love it. And I think, all of our jurisdictions really speak about modeling the life of the early church, that's part of what we're
Yeah.
committed to. But the other thing that comes to my mind is I think Francis might need to be your patron, because the mendicants were the first free rangers, right? They just said, we're not
Yeah.
the Abbey, we're on our feet and we're moving, So,
Yeah.
but I'm wondering, so that I'm going to play a little devil's advocate, which is,
Sure.
so you're free range, but then what does that speak to in terms of the ways in which maybe clergy are sitting in cages in some ways? So, like, what are the
Right.
things that you've identified in your ministry that are the things that maybe hold clergy captive from, new approaches, new ways of thinking, whatever? Would love to hear your insights.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. That's why I say like the cage of the sort of 20th century organizational. So I think the biggest cage that clergy find themselves in is the sustainability cage, right? So we, in the Episcopal Church anyway, and I'm going to say the whole mainline church, basically built this cage where clergy are formed. We often have to go to and are formed through a 3-year seminary degree, which costs a lot of money. It took me 25 years to pay off all my student loans um, from both Georgetown and seminary. And then we are upheld in this kind of professional role, and yet we are put into a system where churches can't afford really to pay professional salaries plus benefits. I mean, most congregations can't, and most of the ones who can are just doing that through smoke and mirrors right now. And so what clergy end up doing is most serve part-time, but part-time pay, right? So they're still serving full-time hours. They're still there every Sunday. They're still there for every emergency. They're still getting up in the middle of the night every time they get called. They're still doing all the Christian formation. They're still mowing the lawn. I have a great story about someone mowing the lawn. Like, they're still doing everything, right? And they are trapped in the system. And I think underneath that is this whole idea of like, build it and they will come. Like, if I work harder, if I do everything around here, we'll get more people into this church, and then we'll get more giving, and then they'll have more money, and then they'll be able to support me, and then we'll grow, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that is the primary cage. I mean, I see this causing burnout and exhaustion all the time with clergy. And it's just built on a lie, right? The whole institution is collapsing, right? And so people are not coming back to church. We are not going to fill up those churches. And so to me, that's one of the biggest cages that people find themselves in. The other one is upholding institution over the gospel. And so like that basically, if you are a typical clergy person in a typical congregation, that I'm just going to go out on a limb and say 90% of your work is upholding the institution, is doing the things, right? The budget, the programs, somebody's mad about something, the stuff, and that comparatively very little of your time is actually spent living the faith, sharing the faith, walking with people in their relationship with God, creating paths for formation, helping people deepen their faith, helping people share the gospel, the stuff that you were called to, right? The stuff that actually brings you joy, the stuff that is about sharing good news in this world and about the transformation of the entire world, is the stuff that sort of gets relegated, like you're writing your sermon in the car, right, on your way home from having another meeting, right? That sort of thing. So I will say those are the two biggest cages that I think clergy, denominations, all of us really, because I also feel like a lot of people who come to me are lay people in pews who've been in pews their entire life and still don't feel close to God, right? And still would have a hard time talking to you about what their faith life is like, or do they know that much about the Bible, or how do I turn to God when things are difficult for me, etc. And so I think also clergy, members of congregations are caught up in this cage as well. And I use my husband as an example, who he works in finance. And so everywhere he's ever gone, he's been the treasurer, somebody wants him on the vestry. And I'm very grateful for that, because I actually met my husband when he was on a board for the diocese and I was working for the bishop. So that's how we met. But he really wanted to grow in his discipleship and grow closer to Jesus. And he kept going to different churches, and all they really had to offer him was, please sit on this board, right? Please help us with our finances. And he doesn't go to church anymore at all. Like, he goes with me to my church sometimes, and he really wants to be able to receive the sacrament and hear good preaching, as he likes to say. But it breaks my heart, because my husband, who is a deeply faithful person, has not been able to find a community of faith where the goal is really growing in faith and sharing the gospel. And I think that's because so many congregations are stuck in this institutional model that's dying.
Well, I think it's very pointed to me hearing you describe this because, for not in all cases, but in a lot of our settings in the inclusive Catholic movement, we have either worker priests, they are married to someone who's successful, and that sustains their household, or they have a full-time job and they minister in their communities as kind of the add-on. And I have to admit that I very much inherited that paradigm of, well, we're going to plant the first ECC church in Minnesota and we're going to build. And here I am, 9 years in, still without, a salary and benefits and with a very modest housing stipend.
Yeah.
And that model is unsustainable. So I'm like you in the
Yeah.
ECC, which is, I was reading an article on your website, where one of the about where you were talking about your advocacy for people being paid for what they do. And
Yes.
and I had a very successful career in marketing communications and then in nonprofit leadership in the Roman Catholic system. So, I also know that there's a, having security and salary and things like this, and it's a really nice thing, actually.
Yes.
Um,
And it's
and
okay.
and you said,
It's spiritual. Yeah.
absolutely. And you said something really bold, which is you said, I think that, tell me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but like, I think that ministers who don't charge for their services are actually doing damage to the church.
100%.
Oh my gosh, that stopped me dead. It stopped me
Sorry.
dead.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
speaking to me, and you're speaking to a lot of my colleagues, and we're in this
Yeah.
tension of we're trying to bring this new thing forward, and we have to devote ourselves to it. And at the same time, it's a very high level of sacrifice to ask somebody. We just did a planning meeting this past Sunday, and we'll do another one. I have a business background, so we do things like that. But
Yeah.
we're going to do one in the winter because that's the only time you can get Minnesotans to sit in chairs. Um, on our 5-year plan. And what are we going to do to transition out of me? We are not going to have the plan B that if we pray for vocations, the Holy Spirit will send us someone. And it's okay. Trish didn't get much of a salary, so we can do that again, right?
Right.
But it's
Right.
hard. It's
Right.
really hard, like parsing, like what is the thing that needs to be done? I mean, I don't know what I'm asking here, Cathie, to tell you.
Yeah, but I'm going to jump in and tell you what you're asking because
Good, thank
you're right on
you.
the right track. And by the way, I said that I have friends. I'm about to go on retreat every year since we graduated from seminary. I go on retreat in July with two of my best friends from seminary, and one of them serves a church. He's retired, so he doesn't need the money and he doesn't get paid. And I just get in his face about it all the time. Like, you are taking that job from someone who does need the money, right? And you're perpetuating a system that is actually killing the church. So I'm ready to be bold on that. And I'm going to bring it back to you and just say, look at you and look where God has put you. You have a business background. And so really, like, the bottom line of how I look at this is treat ministry like a business. And people get so mad about that. It's not spiritual, whatever. I'm sorry. I think of myself as a faith practitioner, right? So in that sense, like a therapist, like a teacher, like a doctor, right? I'm not charging for access to God, right? I am using my skills and talents to help with spiritual health and healing and growth, right? And people pay me for that. And so I think we have to turn that paradigm on its head. I mean, because the old way isn't working. I get really ranty about stewardship too. Like, people aren't giving to the church. People don't think about church communities that way anymore. It doesn't work. And so to start from somewhere else, what are you doing and what do people pay for? Substack has been a huge thing for me. I met you guys on Substack. It's a built-in subscription community. I got my church on Substack. People who they don't know give them money, right? Like, they don't give them money. They pay for something, which is a newsletter, right? And so churches can do this. And there are tons of ministries now about buildings. More and more. There's several in my state in North Carolina. I know there's at least one in Minnesota that help congregations use their buildings. They basically they're ministers, but they're also brokers with basically developers. And developers have a bad name, but these are developers that are people who are mission aligned, right? And so they help congregations use their buildings to rent out part of their space to mission-aligned other organizations as a way to both promote the gospel, but also to create an income stream. So communities need to create income streams, and people who are professional ministers need to charge for it. And the end, right? I just don't see any other way that it's going to work. And basically I have subscriptions, and I also have multiple contracts, and I do consulting, and I'm trying to finish a course and a book right now. But I think that this is what we don't want to talk about. It's very sensitive, and people have all sorts of feelings. And again, the places I've gotten pushback is so amazing, but this doesn't really surprise me. People get angry about it. So I've had people send me a message, really, like the closest I've gotten to being flamed has been about being paid for ministry, even though Jesus talks about it and Paul talks about it, and it was part of the early church, right? You got to pay for ministry. The laborer deserves to be paid. It's not bad. It's what we do with our money, right? It's not about money itself is not bad. And so anyway, sustainability also, like I like to always say, we pay for what we value. If something really matters to your life, take my money. Please let me pay you for this, right? Because this is so awesome and it's changed my life. So that's the other part of it. Are we positioning our product as well as we should, right? Are we out there really sharing with people, this is your life. This is life. This is God's love in the world, right? Don't you want to be connected more fully with this in your life? Because if we were doing that, we wouldn't have a problem with money, right? People don't want to give money to sustain a building and a set of programs and a kind of anemic, we're going to be there on Sunday, but we don't really know why we're here or what this has to do with our lives. So I also think it's a mission problem as well.
Father Cathie, you are stepping into some deep waters here. I love this conversation because one of the cages in which I found myself was that I was a Roman Catholic priest for more than 10 years, and there was a certain commodification, I will say, of the sacraments in the church, where if you want to receive a sacrament, you come to the office, and for $75 or $150 or whatever it is, people get the impression that they are buying sacraments and paying for sacraments. How much does the sacrament cost? And so I'm wondering if you might help to sort of open our eyes to new ways of being able to see this, because on the one hand, there's something very beautiful about inviting the people of God to support the ministries of the church. Here in Austin, Texas, we have a lot of people who don't show up on Sunday, but when it comes time for their daughter's quinceañera, they are happy for padrinos, for godparents, to find the necessary resources for them to enjoy an exquisite celebration with the minister of the church and the church being involved and all of that. So I'm sensing this sort of tension on the one hand about how it is that we help people to really value and sustain our ministries versus this monetizing of ministry and or seeing ministry as something that's more, say, market driven than spirit driven. Any thoughts on all of this, especially for that? In the inclusive Catholic movement, we're known for small communities who are unable to sustain clergy. And so I just think that there are many, many persons who are listening to this podcast who are really on the edges of their seat looking for ideas for, how it is that we make this work for the people of God and for those who serve them.
Amen. Amen, brother. Oh my gosh, my brain just exploded. I have about 17 things to say to what you just said. First of all, I think all congregations should be small. And I think I think one of the things I think we should give up, and one of the cages that we're in, is that somehow small congregations are failures. But I think that the whole idea of intimate communities of faith who pray together and worship together and practice together, to me, that is church, right? That has always been church. And the whole idea of building your church so that there's many, many people, to me, in my mind, what we do is we spawn, more and more small, intricately networked communities of faith all across the church, and also kind of get over our denominationalism. I also believe in post-denominationalism, where we break down some of our silos and work together for the good of the church. So there's that, but we're going to talk about that right now. I'm also going to say small congregations can't sustain ministers. So I also think that we need to once and for all give up this idea that a congregation has a minister and they are like forever and always and solely attached to one another. And it's the congregation's job to support the life of the clergy person. That's one of the things I think that causes so much actually conflict and difficulty in congregations. And when I served on the bishop's staff, I saw this all the time, right? Congregations know that their clergy person's livelihood is dependent upon their being able to pay the salary. And often enough, that is a real sacrifice for the congregation because they're struggling, right? And clergy also know this, right? That the congregation is struggling to pay their salary, right? It causes all sorts of guilt and really terrible things. And it's just a bad system, right? So again, I believe in task-based contracts. So for instance, I serve a church of 30, right? And I'm there 2 Sundays a month. We have a contract for, celebration of the Eucharist, 30 times a year, right? I'm available for weddings and funerals, but they pay me extra for that. I do a certain amount of pastoral care when they call me and how they share it. And then I do a certain amount of teaching and faith formation, right? And so that's what I do. And incidentally, they could also contract with other clergy people. There's nothing in that says that if they want to have the Eucharist celebrated every Sunday, that they couldn't call another priest to do that, which I encourage them to do because it helps with that idea that like it's their church, it's their community, and I am providing a service to that community and with that community. I still feel part of it. I still love them, but that is the sort of framework that I go by. And then therefore, clergy, I think all ministers should think about, like, again, back to sort of like the therapy or the faith practitioner or the medical model, that we have a book of clients, right? So we serve different people at different times and in different ways. And then we set prices for that, right? I get paid $1,000 a month to serve this small church, and they can afford that, right? And just that alone has just been explode. Like I've been there for 10 years now, and it's been the best relationship with the congregation I've ever had. Part of that is it's not my church. It's their church. They're in charge of everything. I'm not in charge of them. I don't make decisions. I sit with them and I wonder where God is in all of this. And they pay me for specific work that I do that has to do with sharing and supporting their spiritual life and also administering sacraments. So, and then that brought me back to another story of back in the day when I was a full-time clergy person. I used to do weddings, right? And so the whole thing of like, do you charge for weddings for, members and whatever. So I was already on that. But, I'd work with these, because you do premarital counseling and you work with these couples who are like, they're going to spend $50,000 on their wedding. And then they're going to give you like a $150 check for oh, we're so glad you did this. Really? So, so I built in to when I was in Kansas working at that church, if I was doing your wedding, you tithe the cost of your wedding to the church, right? And by the way, I would always ask couples what their budget was before I dropped that on them, because people would lie to me. So basically, nobody bats an eye to spend $5,000, $20,000 on a photographer, but they can't even imagine paying $150 to an officiant. And that goes to thinking that what we do isn't work. And I think we have to take that seriously. And I think we have to show people by how seriously we take it that what this is work. How we bear the sacraments and the traditions of the faith is work. And so go all the way back to the other thing it reminded me of is I think no one should ever charge for worship, right? Worship should always be free. The community worship is the work of the people. People gather to worship. I do think, though, that if you belong to a community, if you want to say, I am a member, I'm committing part of my life to be part of this community, then part of that commitment is financial. 100%. One of the things I do is I have a gym for your soul called Traco, which is spiritual exercises for individuals and communities based on the earliest church. And it's a gym. And so just like the gym, you subscribe. You pay your $10 a month to belong to the gym. You cover the gym when you cover the gym. Some people come every day. Some people hardly ever come. But you pay for that privilege of being part of that gym. And of course, if people really can't pay, we'll find a way to get you in. Like, that's not the issue. And people are always willing to pay for other people to be part of the gym and all of that kind of stuff. The same with the church. So those two things, I think, the gathering of the people, prayer and worship, there's no charge for those actual activities. But the work of the minister or the priest, we are bringing our valuable expertise, our valuable sanctified hands, our valuable wisdom and life, and embodying this for you, right? And so if I were your brain surgeon, you would not think twice about paying me for what I do. If I was your yoga instructor, you wouldn't think twice about paying me for what I do, right? And so in that sense, it is no different, which does not take away from the sacredness of what we do or the sacredness of, again, prayer is free, worship is free. It's not the actual activity. It is how we bear our expertise on that. All right, I
Well,
think I could stop there.
yeah, you're stretching me in two areas. Okay, so this is good. This is really good. I think people are going to love this. So in the first area, I think about, uh, telling couples that to tithe to the church, the part of their wedding budget. One of the things that I'm so aware of around here, and I'll tell you, the idea of expertise being important shows up so pointedly at weddings, where the Universal Life Church has made your
Yeah.
college roommate the officiant. I have
Yeah,
been to a number of
rolling my eyes.
weddings. I have been to a number of weddings that I was sitting there like, oh my, right?
Yeah.
So, but now it's actually more rare that I'm finding that people come to the clergy in our region of
Yes.
the country. So,
100%.
adding in an added bar, I think that would be a stretch for me. Although my mentor, as I mentioned earlier, Father Jayme, he used to have couples tithe two place settings of their wedding dinner to a nonprofit of their choosing. So
Huh.
he was already decades ago onto this idea of like what Jayme described. Oh, we can do the huge party, but the church is the afterthought. So that's one thing. But the other thing is this. One of the way I think the Roman Catholic faithful have been manipulated for decades around the question of married clergy and women clergy is the trope that you could never support a clergy person, right? Oh, well, we can't have married priests because Catholics are, if you look at the data about giving, Roman Catholics are way down at the bottom of the way they give. Part of it is we don't have a culture of tithing. We don't promote that. There's been such a paltry ownership level in Roman Catholic settings where everything's at the effect of the diocese or archdiocese. The building is owned elsewhere. This whole sense of, well, I'm not really responsible for this, and we've been, historically until the last, 60 years, a poor form of Christianity. We've been an immigrant church. So I hear what you're saying, but there's part of me that looks in my community and thinks there are deep resources here. The question is, what would it take for you to make that leap to the idea that this really has value? Like I want to invest in this community, because
Yeah.
I kind of don't want to take people off the hook in a way. I feel like, well, I'm growing. Oh,
Ah.
there's my dilemma, like, oh gosh, if
Yeah.
I gave that up,
Yeah. And then
yeah.
I'm gonna push you a little farther because
Okay.
I just heard you say about the weddings, we don't want to set a bar for that. And so I'm gonna get a little psychological with you and push into that. Like this idea that asking them to pay is somehow gonna scare them away or make them less likely to get married in the church. And I think that's the mindset shift right there. That's an invitation, right? That is an invitation to commitment. It is an invitation to show how God is at the center of your wedding and your marriage and how much you support the work of the church and the life of the church and your gratitude for it. And if that's not where you're at, then you shouldn't get married in the church anyway, right? Like, so that sort of thing. So, and then I'm going to put it into the second thing you said, which is that the mindset shift is ours, right? Like the track record of getting other people to change on anything is 100% negative, right? Like we cannot change other people's mindset. We cannot get other people to do things. If I had $1, I would be much richer if I had $1 for every time a clergy person came to me and said, how do I get my congregation to ... And my answer 100% of the time is you don't, you can't, you cannot get to your congregation to do stuff. You have to do it. And it's scary and it's hard. And I most often talk about this with clergy who don't take their days off, don't take their Sabbath, don't take their vacation. Then they're exhausted. And then they say, I can't. What if someone dies while I'm gone? And that is 100% about them and in their power to change. Just don't. And it's true. I've had people die while I'm on vacation. I've had people die on my day off. And I mean, let me back up and say, I've had people die on my day off and I go, and then I take the next day off, right? So I'm not trying to make myself out to be someone who is cold and unfeeling and has not a pastoral bone in my body, but boundaries are ours. Valuing our work is ours, right? I just had a friend call me and say, like, they want the fire department is starting a chaplaincy program and they want him to lead it. And he's so excited. And they're going to pay him $2,500 a year, right? But they want him to kind of like be on call once a month. And I'm like, and you can't do that, right? And he's like, oh, it sounds so exciting. You cannot do that, right? If it's $2,500 a year and that's what they have for the chaplaincy program, then you back it up and you say, what can I do with $2,500 a year to promote this or start to develop this chaplaincy program? Maybe you do a 2-day, like chaplaincy training, and that's what you do. And when they can afford more, they come back. Right. So sorry, but I'm going to, not sorry. It's about, the mindset shift, the paradigm shift is ours.
Father Cathie, there's another paradigm shift that I'm thinking that you are helping people to make, and that is, well, I come from the Roman Catholic world. I was a pastor in the Roman Catholic world for more than 10 years, where, we established churches throughout the city, and we just expect the people to come, and we put online our websites so that people know when the Mass times are and where to find us and who the clergy and the staff members are, etc. But you, right, in your work, have some very pointed thoughts on these things. For instance, when you tell churches that they need to ditch their websites,
yes,
one of the challenges I think for me is that now that I've stepped outside of the Roman Catholic Church, now that we've been here at Holy Family for 15 years now here in Austin, Texas, it's sort of like we've taken these paradigms that we've gotten from the Roman Catholic Church and we set up our, we have our church, we nest with our friends of the ELCA Lutheran Church, and we have Mass times, and we have our website, and we pray and hope that people will come and join us on any given Sunday. But it sounds like you are flipping that on its head, that previous model, mm-hmm. and especially in your stepping out into spaces like Substack, I'm wondering what wisdom our listeners and viewers might gain from your experiences and your challenge to churches, for instance, to ditch their websites.
Yes. As you can say, I love to be provocative. I think Jesus was provocative. And so I'm just taking him as my model. He liked to say things that were kind of, shocking to people to get them to really think about stuff. So I'm using that as my teaching model. So yes, there's so many things about that. One of the things I like to say is, people are no longer coming to church. That is a factual statement, generally speaking. So we need to bring church to people. And so I mean this. And so this is also where I get into technology. I am part of my whole thing is I'm the techie priest and I have a whole history in tech too. And I think this is where AI and other digital tools are gifts to the church. And I think this is where we can so effectively today create relationships with people and help them in their relationship with God online, meet them where they are. And I personally think that church should be in person and almost totally tech free, like we belong to this ancient faith. And I think that the bridge between those two things it has to start online. It has to. Everything we do is online now, right? Like if you want to get completely offline, I don't even think you can, even if you went off into the woods, but that's a whole other conversation. So, and what I mean by that is, yes, there's this whole idea that we just set up our little church, we set up our little digital doorway with our regular static website, we put our service times, and then we sit back and we wait for people to come. And do people come? They do not, right? And people always say to me, oh, well, my church is growing. Okay, I'll give you that. It's not growing enough. It's not growing enough to sustain the model, and it's not growing enough to change the trajectory of where things are going in general. So, okay. So there's a couple of things. One of the reasons that I really advocate that people move their URLs, so freerangepriest.org, if you go there, it's my Substack, is that the internet works differently today, right? So if you just set up a static church website, beautiful though it may be, no one will see it. Absolutely nobody will see it. You're the kind of traffic that you're going to get, that somebody's going to be looking for a particular church and it's going to be yours or one like it. You're never going to rank with the big churches, and other churches have spent decades making sure that their SEO ranks before yours. So if you ask questions like, what's your church like? Or, whatever, it's going to be somebody else's church. In today's AI world, if I even am asking about your church, who's the priest there and what time is their service? AI is just going to serve that up for me. I'm never going to go to your website, right? I'm going to Google it and it's going to say, here's the church, here's the service times, here's directions to it. So I'm never going to see all that work that you did. And also, people don't want information anymore. You can, again, you can get any information anytime you want. They want interaction. They want to be in relationship with you. They want to know what you know about God. So you need to be in a place that is digitally where you are authentically interacting. What are you doing right now, right? You are creating a space for people to come right here and get to know you and get to know your ministry and get to know your church. And so this is what we need to be doing. We need to be bringing church to people. Plus, Substack has a built-in system to promote you, right? So again, Substack makes money when you make money because it's a subscription-based thing, and Substack takes 2 point or whatever, I think 10%. Stripe takes another 2.5%. They take 10% of all of your subscription income, but it's completely free to use. And they have all these tools that are automatic sort of marketing tools. And so it is in their best interest to automatically figure out who might best want to hear your voice and promote you to those people. And so why wouldn't you make your primary digital presence a place whose job it is to literally serve that up to people who might be interested in what it is that you do? So I forget all the rest of the things that you said, but we have to be active. This is evangelism, right? And it's not just telling about our church. It is like, what do you believe? How do you share the faith? How much does God love you? In what ways? What do you think about scripture? What do you think of, that sort of thing? You have this ability to talk directly to hundreds, thousands of people every single day, to show up in their email inbox, to show up via video, to write articles. You guys came to me. Why? How? Because Substack serves something up to you that was interesting to you about what it is that I do. I don't know. I think that's a no-brainer.
Father Cathie, all of this is absolutely fascinating to me. I think partly because I'm new to Substack, relatively new to Substack myself within the last 6 months. And of course, Reverend Trish is on Substack too now. But, many of us are trying to navigate these times in which we're living. There was a glimmer of hope when we entered the COVID pandemic, for instance. Everything was so turned upside down that we came together as clergy and we started to strategize, what does the church of the future look like? And many of our siblings from other mainstream traditions, they started to broadcast their masses and, live stream and, use Zoom and hybrid liturgies and do all sorts of things. But then as soon as the pandemic subsided, what happened? They went back to what they had always done. Reverend Trish, I think, especially within our movement, is one of the few that continues to have a hybrid liturgy that brings together both those who are gathered in person and those who are gathered on Zoom, to build community together. And I think it's, our trying to figure out, where is the Spirit calling us now in 2026, and what will the church look like 10, 20, 50 years from now, so that we can be on the cutting edge of that change.
Yeah, that is so great. And you will be very interested to know, and hopefully your audience will be. I am almost done. I'm getting there. It's longer than I thought it would be, but I'm creating this course. It's called Ditch Your Church Website. And it is somewhat about, it's 9 points actually about using Planning Center, which is a church management software, which is just, I think, one of the greatest gifts to the church of the 21st century, and Substack, to get rid of your static website, get rid of your database, and create a really robust, engaging, highly automated and organized way of keeping track of your ministry, keeping track of your members, being in relationship with them, both in person and online, and sharing your message and connecting with people and creating that. So I'm about to finish that by the end of June. I promise it will be done. And I also do consulting. So this is also part of I am this digital like evangelist because I see as part of the system. Let me back up and say I'm literally helping someone start a denomination right now, and that denomination is going to be like there will be no congregations. In other words, the denomination will be the centralized, purely digital place for all the administration, all the formational resources, all the liturgical resources, all that kind of stuff. And through an app, it will promote people gathering in small communities where their only job will be worship and prayer and Christian practice. And there will be no overhead whatsoever because all of the overhead will go through the denomination. So that idea that, again, the miracle of technology can help us with I like to say, the stuff of church, so that we can spend most of our time and energy doing the good stuff of church, right? And the kind of stuff that takes our energy and must be in person and is absolutely embodied and sacramental, and so but to use these tools that we have that make all the other stuff, the organization, communication, administration, all the stuff happen almost automatically. I mean, I will not lie. I will say it takes a certain amount of effort and courage to set it all up. But once you set it all up, then it runs for you, right? And so A is a lot cheaper, and B is a lot easier, and C, it leaves the time to actually be the church. And I think, again, what's mostly killing the church, both in the sense that it can't support it and that people don't want to be part of it, is this whole heavy infrastructure part of it. And also, by the way, I do not necessarily mean buildings. I love buildings. I love architecture. And I think you're already seeing it, if I understand you correctly. Imagine a world in which church buildings could rent out to small communities, multiple small communities. Like not all celebration and worship needs to happen on Sunday morning, right? Already it happens on Saturday night, it happens on Friday night, it happens on Wednesday night. So you could support a building in ways that I already talked about with the consultants, but also purely by basically saying, hey, our building is available for small worship communities. Sign up. It's whatever it is. It's $50 for every time you sign up, or $150. I'm not here to set the price, but and then that church could be hosting actual worship and practice 24/7, right? All the time, right? And that would maintain these buildings that are so beautiful, most of them, and they're often empty, right? It makes me cry, like most church buildings are only being used on Sunday morning, right? Especially the sanctuaries, and it would have that. It would bring people in to have these places where they can worship and pray and practice Christianity, and also then maintain it. So that all kind of dovetails together.
Yeah, that's something I'm seeing. We're nested at an ELCA Lutheran church, and that's one of the things that I'm seeing out. The pastor here, who's been here for about 3 years, really actively doing, and it's something I adhere to too, which is the building needs to be a community center now. It does not need to be the congregation's holy footprint, right?
Right.
But two things that popped into my mind. One, I want to underline the value of planning center. We use Planning Center, and for all of our listeners who are not using, some kind of CMS, some kind of communication tool, I know this is very businessy. Blame it on my years in marketing and organizational leadership.
Yeah.
No organization would think of operating without these kinds of tools, a secular organization. And they are absolutely time-saving and powerful. And I, too, love Planning Center, and I highly recommend it. The stretch in our community is getting people to put the Church Center app on their phone. We have all the elders, and I can't figure it out. Whatever, we actually at our planning meeting had somebody say we need an hour devoted only to getting everyone on Church Center, and I'm like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. I will say that. I was going to say one of my specialties is teaching old ladies how to use technology. I like to say, because I have done that so many times. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of goes. It's a new aspect of your job description, right? the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I do think it's also something I'm very aligned on, which is the idea of that we're in a paradigm where the church has to go out into the world, and it may not be transactional. It may not be, oh, well, we're going out because then we're going to meet you and then you're going to come to us, but actually completely giving up that paradigm. This is something that has been really something I've been trying to develop in our thinking. And also this idea of church programs, which people are very embedded, like, oh, well, we need more justice activities. And then I sit there and I think, well, wait a minute. Greg puts in X hours in Isaiah, Minnesota, and Diana is in the League of Women Voters, and Karen is giving, 20 hours of her week to Indivisible. We are really active in justice. We just don't think in terms of, well, it's got to be coming through the church program. It's got to be 12 baskets and it's got to be the book bag drive. And not that those things are important. We collect for our food shelf every Sunday and for a resale store that helps with social services in our city. But the paradigm has got to change. So one of the questions I had is, do you have any stories for me about getting people out? Like, what kinds of things have you seen people do to invite them? Like, we'll on Saturday morning, we'll be over at Eden Prairie Pride with our booth. And, we do some of those obvious things, but I'm still struggling with, what are the things that we need to be heading out in? Where do we need to be as the church? To really bring the love of God forward in other kinds of settings than my mother opened their yellow pages and looked for the Catholic Church.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, again, I think in so many ways we need to be online. In so many ways that has to happen online. The other thing I think is, I'm going to go to two things before I go to your third one, because I think this really is a paradigm shift. So one of the things I like to talk about is root versus fruit of the faith, right? And this is where I get sort of, about programs. And I always say churches should not do outreach, and people get really mad at me. It's one of my provocative things that I say, because like you just said, there are organizations of all kinds, of all stripes, for every reason, that already do that, whatever it is that you're doing, and probably do it better. And you absolutely should encourage your members, they probably already are, to be part of those other organizations. And so, but nowhere else in today's world do people learn about the faith. People learn about the Bible. They learn about Christian practice. They learn about theology. They learn about forgiveness. There's nowhere else to go except for church. And I think I think one of the reasons the church is failing is because we might have a Bible study here or there, but mostly we're about these like programs and outreach and all this kind and other and events and that sort of stuff. How much of what we're doing is actually about forming people in the faith and being together for prayer and worship? So I think the first thing we need to do is really ask ourselves those questions, right? And how are we actually maintaining the roots of Christianity? And then I would say the fruit of Christianity is what that then compels you to do in the world, right? And there are tons of religious and secular organizations that do all sorts of those sorts of things, and people should either or do these things personally or involve themselves with other organizations that align with what they feel called to do with the fruit of their ministry. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, I also believe very strongly in networked church. And so there's also this whole, as far as I'm concerned, this whole 20th century model also depends on what I call in-house production of everything, as if no other church or religious organization exists. We have to make up every single one of our Bible studies, every single one of our programs, every single one of our theological things. Oh my gosh, it's exhausting. Every single one of our adult forums, when there are tons of things online that congregations could do together, or you could just direct your congregation to. There's a really great Bible study series on YouTube that's free, that like I send everybody, if people want to know more about the Bible, I send them there, right? Like that's how they're going to learn more about the Bible, that sort of thing. There's also in-person churches that are also doing great things, that have wonderful discipleship groups. Join them. Send your congregation members to go join their discipleship group, right? And then have one really good thing that you do and invite other people to do that. And that's what I think. I think that people, like, So I have a friend, well, I know several churches that do in person. They do on Good Friday, they do Stations of the Cross where they walk around the city and they carry a cross and they do the prayers. And they get hundreds of people to come and do that, right? So, and again, the whole idea of like churches having booths places, it's all well and good, but like you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this, right? Or if we're showing our support for the cause, that's fine. But if we're actually trying to invite people to our church, I just don't see that how or why somebody would be compelled to do that. Do something as the church, right? And then invite people to that, right? And it could be outside the church, right? And then I think the third part of that is be the church, right? Like, so this whole concept of like, I'm going to go out, like people should invite their friends to church, but like the whole idea that we're just going to go out and, find people and convert them and have them come to our church. Instead, just be the church, like just be the person that you are being formed to be in the church. And I know we got to go, but I'm going to give you one story. And this is from way, way back before I was ordained. And in my last secular job, I didn't even realize it, but I talked about my church all the time because I loved my church and we were always doing things. And I was saying this, like we went to the ball game and we did this and we stayed up all night and we did this. And then one day, one of my colleagues said, you have to tell me about this church that's so wonderful, right? And so like just the fact that I was a transformed person by being part of this church made the people around me want to know what that was that transformed my life. And so that is really like my best answer to that question.
Father Cathie, we've come to the point in our episode where we typically do a rapid fire set
All
of
right.
questions. We call it our Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, where you just say the first thing that comes to your mind in a word or a sentence. These are rapid fire questions, and this is the Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire Free Range Priest Edition. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I love this.
Question number 1, Father Cathie, coffee, tea, or something stronger?
Coffee by the gallon.
Favorite biblical character?
Oh, Gideon.
Favorite spiritual practice?
Sabbath.
Most challenging ministry lesson?
I'm not in charge.
Favorite gospel?
That's a hard one. John, I'm going to go for it.
Favorite theologian or spiritual writer?
Oh my gosh, that's hard. Jürgen Moltmann, though. And C.S. Lewis is the very close second.
Yeah. One thing every church should stop doing now?
Outreach.
Favorite hymn or song, Father Cathie?
Oh gosh. Be thou my vision.
One thing every church should start doing?
Putting their website on Substack.
3 last questions. If you weren't a priest, Father Cathie, what would you be doing?
Veterinarian.
Your favorite podcasts and or Substacks?
Oh my gosh, how long do you have? I can't do it. Half marathoner, because I'm a runner. Graphs about religion. I love the podcast "What It's Like to Be," which just talks about what people do in their jobs. All right, I'm going to stop there because there's like a million. I could go on.
Final question, Father Cathie. What gives you hope?
God. The gospel, the sunrise every morning.
Father Cathie, we come to the point in our episode where we share some final words. If you don't mind, I'll step in with some final words, and I'll kick it over to Reverend Trish. And we always give our guest the opportunity to be able to offer some final words. Father Cathie, what a delight! I see you. I follow you on Substack. I love reading your words. They make me think often long and hard about various issues that we face in the inclusive Catholic movement. So I really appreciate your willingness, first of all, to be a witness in this world, right? Father Cathie, as the free range priest, one who is helping to make people think. And so just your very presence in this world and your ministry is something that I cannot even wrap words around. It is such a beautiful and important thing for the church. So thank you for being with us today, Father Cathie. Reverend Trish?
Well, I think of all the podcasts we've done, this one has landed home for me the most, Cathie. And you've given me a lot to think about, and I am going to be asking all of my community council members or I should say, I hate that all of our community counselors to take time and listen to this. Because you're underlining some things that in my gut I've kind of known and I'm afraid to step out on, like stop worrying about outreach, right? In terms
Yeah.
of body count, right?
Mhm,
Not in
mhm.
terms of share the gospel with all people. So I'm really grateful. I am so thrilled to find another Hoya woman priest, and we always end the session by letting you have the guest have the final word. So, is there anything you'd like to share before we close out our time together?
Oh my gosh. First of all, I want to say thank you very much. You two are also free range priests. You are really doing cage-free ministry. I really love that. And it always makes me so excited and happy when I find people who are reimagining ministry in today's world. And you guys are definitely doing that. So thank you for finding me and thank you for this opportunity. And again, it fills me with hope and I wanted to share that with others too, that I think that one of the big things is feeling alone, in this world. I think ministers can feel alone really easily. And I also think it can feel really lonely to feel like I'm the only one who feels this way, or I'm the only one who's kind of pushing against this boundary or trying to bust out with this new and creative way of bringing good news into the world. So I want to encourage other people to do that. And I want to thank you for the ways that you do that as well.
Well, thank you so much, Father Cathie Caimano, our free range
Thank
priest, author,
you.
coach, consultant. I'm going to add some things that are not on your exhorter, challenger, uplifter, coming to us from Charlotte, but wherever you are in the United States, find her Substack and get on her list and start reading. And thank you, all of our listeners and viewers, for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, which is what we've talked about for an hour, and resistance. I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Vani.
And I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And we head out ready to disrupt systems, knowing that the Holy Spirit is working in all of it.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.